Welcome to the Violet Hour. I'm Nicole, and tonight we're going to be diving into something strange. This story is so baffling, it could only be true. Now, if you've listened before, you'll notice I'm flying solo tonight. Dennis will pop in from time to time, but for now, it's just us. Come, sit down. I've got something weird to tell you. I'm going to set the scene for you. England, 1814. The King, George III, has lost his mind, quite literally. His son, who is a notoriously scandal-prone Prince Regent, is running things, and trust for him is not exactly abundant. But the long Napoleonic Wars have just sputtered out with Napoleon's abdication. Europe was being carved up anew at the Congress of Vienna. Back home in London, bread cost a fortune. Food riots were erupting in the streets. Families were abandoning farms for cramped cities. And everyone, and I do mean everyone, was on edge. Churches were overflowing with evangelical revivals. Preachers were roaring fire and brimstone sermons into smoky air. The book of Revelation didn't feel like some distant myth anymore. So when a woman said she was a prophet, it didn't sound completely bonkers. It sounded like the answer everyone had been praying for. Joanna Southcott started off perfectly ordinary, like most of us do, right? She was born in 1750, a daughter of a farmer in a small Devon village. She spent her life in domestic service as a maid or a servant, the kind that we see on shows like Downton Abbey or Bridgerton. So she'd slip quietly between upstairs and downstairs worlds. It's kind of how I'm envisioning her. She had no formal education, no fancy connections, and no stage to stand on. Then, in her early 40s, something strange happened. She began to have visions. She said she heard the voice of God. She put pen to paper, of course, and wrote these visions down. And they were rhyming prophecies that sounded nothing like the poets everyone was reading back then, like Byron or Wordsworth. They sounded like pages torn straight from the Bible. And so by the early 1800s, encouraged by supporters like the engraver William Sharp, she moved to London. Between 1801 and 1814, thanks to her visions, she published around 65 books and pamphlets. I mean, that's a staggering number for someone who had no formal education and who essentially was a servant. Her message appealed to a lot of people, and her following exploded. Estimates say she probably had upwards of 100,000 people following her by 1814. Most of them were located in London and the industrial north. She drew in women, working people, folks who were hungry for her message of universal salvation, a message that gave them hope in desperate times. She even sold seals of the Lord. These were simple signed paper certificates priced from 12 shillings to a guinea. Listen, that was half to a full week's worth of wages for a laborer back then, about $600 to $900 today. Each one promised a place among the 144,000 elect saved in Revelation. So yeah, bread might be scarce, but eternal insurance? People lined up. Can you imagine it? A former maid turned celestial notary handing out tickets to heaven? Oh boy, looking back through time, all I'm getting is snake charmer energy, or maybe a modern televangelist. But hindsight's 20/20, I suppose. But in the spring of 1814, when Napoleon finally fell, her followers seized on earlier prophecies. She described a tyrant dominating Europe, an antichrist figure. His dawn fell. So when Napoleon finally fell for good in the spring of 1814, her followers seized on her earlier prophecies, where she described a tyrant who'd dominate Europe, an antichrist figure. Napoleon's downfall felt like proof. If she was right about that, what else might she be right about? Early in 1814, Joanna drops the biggest claim yet. She's pregnant at 64 years old. Not 24, 64. And she's never been married. So she's claiming it's a virgin birth. You know, like the one Mary had. The baby, Shiloh, has already been foretold, of course, in the book of Genesis. That's the scepter holder, the future ruler. Never mind that most Christian theologians of the time, and even still today, think Shiloh was a prophetic reference to Jesus Christ. Now, let's pause for a quick reality check on motherhood in Regency era London. Okay, so yes, this is Bridgerton era-esque time period. So ordinary folks scraping by, women were not getting married super early like we kind of read about or see in these movies, okay? And that's because they had to work. They had to, save money, work until they could afford, decent roof, enough bread, and maybe some coal for the fire. So obviously, yes, the wealthy elite moved way faster. Aristocratic girls often married maybe in their late teens to early 20s, with having their first babies coming in around that same time. So yes, Bridgerton made it look like, every debutante was popping out heirs left and right. But real life was more varied, of course. Grand ladies started earlier, but most of London held off until the household ledger looked ready. So if we go back to our old gal, Joanna, she's literally saying this is not a metaphor. She described real symptoms, swelling, feeling movement inside, and the voice she heard for years even had laid it out plainly in a message. And this is a quote. "This year, in the 65th year of thy age, thou shalt have a son by the power of the Most High." Doctors examined her. Of course they did, right? And they were like, yep, all signs point to, yes, you are pregnant. And because of her age and her prophetic writings, her private visions, it became a public drama, essentially. So I'm going to, quick side note again, Joanna in 1814 was 64. She was born in 1750. In 1814, life expectancy stats for that time, they looked grim, okay? Women especially lived till about 38, 42 years old in London. And that's skewed hard by high infant mortality and child mortality, right? But if a woman managed to survive into adulthood, especially if she had worked in domestic service, had regular meals, indoor shelter, and, had to do less brutal work than, say, working in factories, she often made it to her late 50s or early 60s. So Joanna is right at that kind of prime end of life time, okay? So it wasn't unheard of for a woman to be 64 years old who had Joanna's status. But the headlines are the things that no one was expecting. So of course, newspapers, they jumped on this story. You had the Times, the Morning Chronicle, the Examiner, all running stories about her pregnancy. There were crowds camped outside her house on Manchester Street. So you can imagine, this is like early fall, so it's cold. And I can just imagine these people, coming back from work or maybe before, waiting, their breath fogging in the air and just staring at her curtains, waiting for Netflix to drop the latest episode of whatever it is we're binging, right? They did this for months, not weeks, not days, months. Literally the whole country was basically live posting updates on this woman's pregnancy. So her due date, which was October 9th, comes around. Nothing happens. Complete crickets. And Joanna calmly says, God's timing isn't ours. Her followers, they nod along totally. She was right. And the great baby watch continued. So November moves into December, and the papers are continuing to update status reports like they're battlefield dispatches. Here's one from the Statesman dated November 28th. And it kind of just shows, what Joanna's status or, like how she was doing. On Thursday night, she complained of great oppression insomuch that she could not lay down on her bed, nor be in one posture, but a very short time together during the night. On Friday morning, she got some sleep, but wakened frequently with the oppression and pain. Towards the evening, she became restless again, had a very bad night this day, Saturday, is so much exhausted that she cannot keep her head off the pillow. She complains of a giddiness in her head, an extreme faintness all over her, and general pains all over. This is the state she is in at present. Some change must soon take place, according to all human understanding, as she continues without taking nourishment, except the wine, which does not remain long on her stomach. People all over England were hearing about her getting weaker, barely eating, and the pain she had all over her body. Her supporters continued their vigil, camped outside her house, staring at those curtains for any update. She died about a month later, either December 26th or 27th of 1814. It varies depending on the account. And that's because her followers had a hard time accepting the news and they wouldn't let her go. They wrapped her in blankets and placed hot water bottles at her feet, and they kept the room she was in warm, hoping this would revive her after 4 days like she had said. Of course, it didn't revive her. The Stamford Mercury put it straight. Basically, they said her death excited no painful sensations in the bosoms of her disciples. They regarded her as merely gone for a while, end quote. So the crowds, they continued to ask if she had stirred. The room smelled of smoke and vinegar, and that was to hide what was happening. Her dead body was doing what dead bodies do, helped on by all the heat they were applying to it. Finally, an autopsy was performed. 15 doctors were there, and their report was clear. There was no baby. Her uterus was small, and the swelling had come from fluid and gas. That was all. A modern take on this would call it pseudopsoriasis. It's when the mind is so convinced that the body plays along. Back then, it was called dropsy. Essentially, it's the same outcome, right? Months of national watching. Zero miracle. In January of 1815, the newspapers at this point, they'd all sharpened their knives and they went in for the kill. The Examiner ran a gleeful headline that read, "Death and Dissection of the Prophetess." One doctor had already called the swelling flatulency weeks earlier and had scribbled a prescription for it. So the skeptics were practically popping champagne in print. The press had painted her as a deluded old woman and her followers as gullible dupes, and the whole affair as a scandalous waste of ink and attention. Yeah, never mind that they had been, printing updates nonstop, right? I guess it sold their papers. But then, her followers, they flipped the scripts a little and they were like, oh, no. The birth has been spiritual the whole time. There was not supposed to be a baby, just, I guess, a cosmic download or something. Others went with postponed, God's on his own timetable, and, stuff like that. A few of her followers did the Irish goodbye thing and slipped out the back door. But for the most of them, like the larger part of them, they didn't. Like, they held on. And eventually, they recalibrated. And I guess, when the spaceship doesn't land or the storm doesn't hit, the miracle stays in the mail. Most people don't fold the tent and go home, right? They kind of have to rewrite the stories so that it all makes sense in their heads. I guess it's human nature. But again, Joanna's story is not over. Of course it's not, right? Because before she died, she left this sealed wooden box that was purportedly stuffed like some kind of divine time capsule. She didn't trust anyone to open without a full committee of bishops. Her instructions for how this box was supposed to be opened were super specific. So it could only be opened during a genuine national crisis and only when 24 of the Church of England's bishops were present. And that wasn't even enough. They would have had to have spent days praying and studying. How many days? It doesn't say. I guess apparently 24 bishops is the magic number, to not fuck up the apocalypse. I don't know. Anyway, so that little clause kept her name floating around. It kept her name floating around long after the headlines of her autopsy and her death had faded. Southcottian groups, that's like the people that followed her, what they were called, they hung on, okay? And come 1927, the world was still kind of trying to shake off the Great War, and they were kind of looking for signs that life was not completely doomed, right? And here comes this dude. His name's Harry Price. He was a psychic investigator, basically, I guess a tabloid reporter for the occult world. And he'd claimed he'd come into the possession of the box, which was a small 12-inch walnut casket. It was banded in a rusty seal that had been sent to him anonymously by someone claiming it had been with a Welsh family for years. So Price, he did the most logical thing he could do and x-rayed it, and he saw the outline of a pistol inside. He invited, every bishop he could to come, and most sent polite but firm no's or snarky declines. Because of course they would, right? Harry Price opened the box on July 11th, 1927 at his National Laboratory of Psychical Research in Kensington. There was one reluctant prelate who showed up, and that was the suffragan Bishop of Grantham. Grantham, yes, as in Lord Grantham, I think from Downton Abbey. Oh my goodness, I don't know. And his name was John Hine. Sorry, I'm just so amazed by this story. Anyway, what was inside the box? Well, 56 random things, but nothing that was apocalyptic or, foretold the future. Okay, so included in this box, it was basically a junk drawer, I guess. It was a broken horse pistol, an ivory dice cup, a lottery ticket, some say dated 1796, others later, a woman's embroidered nightcap, earrings, a fob purse with silver and copper coins, romantic pamphlets, and popular fiction scraps, a bone puzzle, brass money weights, a miniature case, and, with some other odds and ends. So basically, someone's box they left in an attic or, junk drawer that, got sealed up wasn't by mistake. So the press had a field day, of course, and the skeptics, they popped their champagne in print once again. Her followers immediately went, wrong box, obviously, insisting that the real one, full of the true sealed writings, remained safe and hidden in a location known only to a true trusted few, and it would be revealed when the bishops, I guess, finally got their acts together and met properly. So if we jump back a little bit in time to 1919, another woman who lived in Bedford, her name was Mabel Baltrop. Later, she was called Octavia. she was after her own revelation. And so she founded what became the Panacea Society. She believed she was the spiritual daughter continuing Southcott's line, the women of revelation who'd finished the work, essentially. Bedford, they decided, was the original Garden of Eden, and this was a 3-mile radius around their chapel. So they practiced healing with panacea water from a local spring, blessed linen dipped in it, diluted, drunk, or sponged to cure anything from cancer to despair. And they campaigned relentlessly for the bishops to open the real box. They did this throughout the 1920s and 1930s. They would run newspaper ads, put up billboards that said things like crime and banditry, distress and perplexity will increase in England until the bishops open Joanna Southcott's box. That's a mouthful. They gathered petitions with thousands of signatures, even prepared a house called Castle Side with rooms for the 24 bishops and a replica cradle sitting ready, just in case Shiloh showed up late. And they kept at it for decades. Ads in the Sunday Express, posters in Piccadilly Circus, warning that war, disease, crime would only worsen until that box was opened properly. So when Octavia died in 1934, the group carried on until their last full member, whose name was Ruth Klein, passed away. And that was in 2012. Yeah, that's a long time. So after that, the religious community pretty much ended. Today, it's the Panacea Charitable Trust. And, they're still sponsoring research into prophetic movements and helping with local poverty and health in Bedford. So, that's really nice and positive. So I like that. And they also run a museum called the Panacea Museum. It's at 9 Newham Road, which is right in one of their old houses. And it's open Thursdays to Saturdays from 10 to 4. And they've got exhibits on Southcott's life, the Society's history, healing water, archives, photos, and yes, even a replica of the sealed box and that ever-ready cradle. I guess they're keeping the story alive, not so much as a prophecy anymore, but a history worth remembering. I don't know, you guys. Was Joanna Southcott running some kind of long con? I don't know. There's no record, really, of her, buying a yacht or vanishing with a suitcase full of shillings. No escape plan, no deathbed confession, nothing. She spent decades being completely consistent, completely visible, and then bet everything on a pregnancy claim that any doctor with a stethoscope could disprove in about 5 minutes. Was it fraud? If it was fraud, this would be the most exposed high-risk fraud in history. Like robbing a bank while live streaming it, to the local news station, I guess. But if it was a sincere belief, it was so deep that her own body apparently decided to play along. Either way, she'd built a whole community around one massive promise. And a tired, spiritually starved nation, they lined up outside her house and waited for this little bundle of hope to arrive. And sadly, it never came. I guess what's unsettling so much about this story isn't whether she was lying or delusional. It's how badly we as humans can want something, anything, to be true. And our brains are so amazing that we can literally convince ourselves that yes and no, it's true. We can just live in these delusions even when truth is staring at us, right? I don't know. I think modern psychiatry would probably take a look at her and her auditory hallucinations, the grandiose religious delusions, the automatic writing, and the textbook pseudosciences and go, yeah, that's some kind of psychotic spectrum thing, to be sure. Maybe schizophrenia with religious features, or bipolar with psychotic breaks, or at least a really committed delusional disorder. Again, that false pregnancy is a classic psychosomatic thing where your mind is so locked on the idea that your body starts playing along. Back then, they would have just called it hysteria or heated imagination, because women having big feelings was basically a diagnosis. No one was running around with MRIs or, handing out antipsychotics in 1814. Was she mentally ill? Probably. Does it make her story any less interesting? I don't think so. Not even a little. She was a servant who turned her head into a cathedral and filled it with prophecies and somehow got 100,000 people to sit outside her house waiting for God to RSVP. I don't know. That's either tragic, brilliant. It's probably a bit of both. You take your pick. I'm not going to judge. But her story did not fade. Oh gosh, no. Her story, apart from the people that took on their religious beliefs or whatever, it rippled out into the culture of the day. How things enter our own, cultural pop culture zeitgeist, right? It did then. So Charles Dickens himself, the master of writing about English life, slipped her into the opening of A Tale of Two Cities. Now he's painting her in 1775, that's the best of times, worst of times year, right? But he drops this little kind of wry aside that reads, "Spiritual revelations were conceded to England at the favored period, as at this Mrs. Southcott had recently attained her 25th blessed birthday, of whom a prophetic private in the Life Guards had heralded the sublime appearance by announcing that arrangements were made for the swallowing up of London and Westminster." She wasn't even famous then, right? In 1775, she would have just been turning 25, still a maid, no prophecies yet. But by 1859, when Dickens wrote about her, her name had become shorthand for the era's kind of wild spiritual fever. And so, he's using her like a cultural marker, proof that the people of England were already primed for prophecies, ghosts, and end times chatter. I don't know. I don't know if it's affectionate mockery or Dickens, tipping his hat at the very real human nature of where, we're just always trying to reach for something extraordinary. Famous thinkers and writers of the day, deep thinkers like John Henry Newman, who later became Cardinal Newman, the great Catholic thinker, wrote in an essay, An Aid of a Grammar of Assent, in 1870, using her as an example of how the mind locks onto certitude. Even G.K. Chesterton, who in 1908 wrote Orthodoxy. Now, Chesterton is a major Christian writer of his time, and in 1908, he was still technically Anglican. He did convert to Catholicism in 1922, but then in this book, Orthodoxy, he wrote about Joanna. He wrote, "Believing utterly in oneself is a hysterical and superstitious belief like believing in Joanna Southcott. The man who has it has Hanwell written on his face, as plain as it is written on that omnibus." Hanwell was this big Victorian lunatic asylum near London. So what he's saying is unchecked belief in your own infallibility marks you as unhinged. Kind of like, clinging to this wild private revelation or a prophecy that doesn't hold up. What this tells us is that by 1908, her name had become so embedded in the English imagination that he could drop it and everyone would be like, yeah, they'd nod and they would get the joke. So, the joke being that she was the prophetess whose certainty convinced thousands, yet her story ended in disappointment, right? It's not necessarily a cruel mockery, maybe witty illustration, because she'd become that figure everyone recognized, standing in for delusion or wild faith. It depends on how you look at it, I guess. So with all of that, bearing all of that in mind, right? Like, you would think, okay, like, truly, it's foolhardiness. Like, it's completely foolish to just continue, right? And so, like, her story would have faded and, her believers would have died off eventually, right? But you'd be wrong. There are 2 small groups who still carry the faintest threads forward today. Little pockets of believers, tiny specks, yes, compared to the crowds of, 1814. But these are people who are continuing to read her writings and holding on to these ideas of divine visitations and still truths. If nothing else, they are persistent. In the end, Joanna Southcott wasn't some grand dramatic figure, like straight out of a Gothic novel, right? No. She was a regular woman, a farmer's daughter. She grew up knowing exactly where the butter came from. And she spent decades as a servant, polishing other people's silver, sweeping other people's floors. And I just, I kind of just think about her in that little house on Manchester Street. And I wonder, after all that time making other people's houses perfect, I wonder if she kept her own home as neat as a pin, like where dust would never have had the chance to settle. Or did she finally let it build up just a little because she could? I wonder how she liked her tea. What we do know is that she did go to church twice on Sunday, and she took communion without fail. And she never asked for much. Truth is, I guess we'll never know. I guess, like, to kind of just close this whole thing out, I think if there's one thing that we can look at this story and kind of reflect on, perhaps, is the human nature of it all, right? People hoping, waiting, wanting to believe that something better was coming. And, maybe that's kind of how Joanna got into it. Like, life back then was so bleak. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe at first she kind of just escaped into her head, and they were like little stories she told. And then, before she knew it, she believed them herself, like they'd gotten away with her. Kind of like, when you're having sushi and you put too much wasabi on in the soy sauce or like on the actual thing, and you like eat it and then you inhale, and before you know it, you've got like a wasabi bomb in your nose. I kind of think that's probably like what happened to her here. It just got away with her, and then before she knew it, she believed it. I don't know. Needless to say, it is so strange. But that's the story. That's the story for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please leave a review, share this podcast with your friends. And if you have like a cool idea or got a strange tale, certainly email me, violethourpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, stay strange, stay curious. Good night.